The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
Oh, get in.
2019 is what 2012 was supposed to be. The year of the world
true.
ending. It's actually this year. They got it off. They were off a little.
Just a few years. It's fine. Their math checks out.
Start the episode. Get it. Get it.
Do it.
Welcome to the Fantom Zone. 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm Noah.
Kayla.
Oh, Jared. Sorry,
We'll
Off
get it.
beat, man.
We'll
I'm
get
good
it
at this.
eventually.
we got it like 4 times in a row, and now I'm bored of getting it. And now we need
You're
to
bored of
get
saying
it.
your name?
Yeah, kind of.
So today is a somber episode. So
Yeah.
with Endgame coming out and Game of Thrones premiering the day we're recording this,
well, I assume everyone will die now. And then-
Death.
and with Star Wars ending, there's
Death.
lots of deaths happening
Yeah.
this year.
Of franchises and characters.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
decided to make a whole episode on death itself.
Yes.
Talking about good things of death, bad things of death. Should it happen more often than not?
Marvel's Lady Death, DC's Man Death. I believe you remember that.
There has to be
character.
man death.
We do
right?
some stretches.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess a good way to, since this topic was brought to our attention with Endgame coming up, and Infinity War was just filled with deaths that we know aren't gonna stick. It kind of made us think, like,
That's a big thing.
is
Yeah.
this something that they should keep doing? Is this something they shouldn't? But with Infinity War, regardless of the characters that did turn into dust, I still felt for it, especially with Spider-Man.
Sure.
I mean, I think that was a good example of like, okay, we know he's probably coming back because he's only had 2 movies.
Which
Yeah.
one's Spider-Man? Again?
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Or I said 2 movies, but he's been in 2 movies.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still felt for him.
Well, that's
only
how you could tell who was a comic fan, I think, as that, like, when that happened, when the snap happened, and like non-comic fans, a lot of them are just like, oh my God, they all died. What are we going to, they all sound like that. They all died. What are we going to do? And it's like every comic fan was like, that's part of this whole thing.
Yeah,
is
well,
they're coming back.
of course, they had to do that.
Yeah.
And I feel like the reason people felt for it was the characters' reactions to those characters dying, not only your attachment, because, I mean, they couldn't solely rely on, oh no, Spider-Man's dead. Can you believe it? Because again, most people are like, well, he already announced a movie in the future.
Yeah.
Black
True.
Panther is probably coming back.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the people that loved those characters, like in movie, in universe,
Yeah.
were devastated. So you kind of felt their devastation too. So not
Yeah.
only were you reacting to the loss of the characters themselves, you were sympathetic to the people that they left behind.
Yeah, that is true. And I
That's
think
a good point.
if they execute it well, which just in the few minutes that was after everybody disintegrating and you saw the look in some like Okoye's face and
Yeah.
everything, it's like, okay, like even though I know these characters or some of them, I don't know these characters are coming back, but more often than not they do. I get just the emotion. I was like, okay, I can't help but feel for you.
Exactly.
Because of that. But as comic fans, we do have to ask ourselves, like, do we like this? Like, do we like death? Because I mean, we keep coming back for it, and they keep pumping it out. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, that's true. One thing I'll say is that we criticized it a lot on this show, and I think generally, and there's a lot of cynicism towards the idea, and for good reason. We're going to talk about it. But we can't go the opposite direction either, I think, or at least that's my position, which is that we can't just not have death in comics. And I have to at least allow for, like when it happens, especially, I have to allow for, okay, let me accept that this is a decent writing decision and measure it that way. I can't just be like, oh, they killed another one. Because I think we're a bit, all 3 of us are a bit knee-jerk about that a little too, which is that like when we hear somebody's dying, I think that there's a kind of like eye rolling. Even if we have a better judgment later, our initial feeling is like, this one again.
Well, we see a lot about that now with predictions of who's going to stay dead
Yeah.
in Endgame, because we're assuming then, people that died in the snap are coming back. Loki and Gamora, I'm guessing, are still kind of up in the air because they didn't die that way.
yeah.
But I mean, you can't go one day without scrolling through any social media timeline without how Cap is going to actually die in Endgame.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because, I mean, you see that all the time, even in comics, like a big event's coming out, like who's going to die, who they're going to kill. And then with Endgame, it's everybody's like, okay, so Iron Man or Captain America are the ones that should die or have to die.
They should go down together.
Yeah. You actually brought up a really good point. You said they should die together.
Yeah.
If they were going to die. And
I don't like the whole one or the other because I love both of those characters. I just feel like story-wise, they should both die together or no one should die.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a cop-out, but I'm just like...
I'm actually a little on your side here on the cop-out side. I think it's at least worth entertaining that none of them will die. I know that like crazy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bet on it because I think it's, people almost want some death to like create stakes or something like that, but it doesn't. I don't think it needs to happen. I'll say this, I won't be disappointed if nobody dies.
I agree. And again, I feel like just having one character take the fall, I just feel like it would breed like infighting. So it's either the old Avengers team just goes down together to bring the new one back, Cap and Tony go down together, or no one should die. Those are my 3 different avenues that I'm like satisfied. I'd be satisfied.
So this is, I know we're going to talk a lot. Here's a minor thing. I can't stand when they kill someone, but it's inherently a minor character. And now I know that that's not completely off the table, but like in Civil War, I don't know if you guys remember, they killed this character called Bill Foster. So he was actually in the second Ant-Man. It's Lawrence Fishburne's character. Goliath, or Black Goliath, because that's how racist comics used to be. It's like, it's Black Superman or whatever. Okay, so they killed him, and they were like, the marketing was like, oh, there's a big death. It's like, I haven't seen this character in 20 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
So I don't know.
I just I know I've been mentioning this the past couple of weeks. I just got done reading the novelization, and I feel like that was handled well, especially from, I mean, this is segue. Well, I'll try to bring it back, guys. But, I mean, that kind of is what decided, that's why Sue decided to switch sides. And, they had to react to...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, the stakes weren't this big character died. It was more like it kind of brought the heroes involved in Civil War down,
I think you're right. I think from a literary standpoint, it's pretty good. But I was annoyed by them
the
sort of
marketing.
especially them sort of acting very brazen. Like Marvel was like, we'll kill anybody.
Yeah.
I'll kill Kite Man right now. Not a Marvel character. That's even more to the point. They're
Marvel
like,
threatens to kill a DC character.
Marvel's like, we're gonna kill Batman in this next thing.
Oh no, I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah.
All right, so enough with Endgame because that makes me depressed, and I'm anxious to see what's gonna happen.
I mean, you gotta imagine the episode that we record, like the movie review, will just be an hour of me sobbing in the background. You guys can talk about whatever you want, but I'll be incoherently sobbing. So
I'm gonna
I'll enjoy the movie. So
I'm gonna have to like pose as both of you. Like I'm gonna have a 1-person podcast as both of you, both incapacitated. So I was thinking about death in comics, and one of the big things that even when I'm reading stuff like Heroes in Crisis and all of these other comics, is does this story really need somebody to die?
It's a good question.
I mean, there's stories. The one that I can really specifically say, yes, it does, was Identity Crisis. That's a murder mystery.
Because it's about that.
Yeah, it's literally a murder mystery, and that revolves around it, so it's fine. But I mean, some stories, I just feel like just go out of their way to kill characters that didn't further the plot, had nothing to do with the, I don't know, superhero that's going crazy at the moment. I think it's crazy. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that every story needs somebody to die.
It's a good question. I think one thing is that there are stories where someone dies and we'd all agree that it's organic. I mean, if we like it, it's organic to the story. It makes sense. Glad they did it, but you know what I mean. And then there are stories that you sort of touched on, which I think are worth asking about, which is what happens when the story intends to kill the character. So in other words, it's not just an extra throwaway. Death of Superman is a great example. Death of Captain America.
Death of Wolverine.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. There are these stories where the editorial decision comes down. This is what we're gonna do. How do we feel about that? Because you can't argue that it's cheap or a throwaway. They've intended we're gonna kill this character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a throwaway. Like, I mean, the Death of Superman is one of my favorite stories of Superman. The Death of Superman and the Reign of Superman. I like both of those.
Fantastic.
To begin with. I think if the story, if you know going into it that, okay, this is the death of this character and this is how it's going to play out. If it's executed well, just like the death of Superman, I know that's a little controversial. A lot of people don't either like that story or how it was handled, but I think that's an okay thing. I think if it's intended to kill somebody or if that's what the story is about, then, I mean, go ahead.
Get him.
But I think one of the things that I think about when does this character need to die is in Infinite Crisis when Superboy Prime literally punches Panther's head off for no reason. They're literally trying to help him, like Red Star and Panther's trying to help him, and he just swings his arm back and her head explodes.
No, it's great, but she turned into that hero. She was resurrected into the Headless Kitty, and that was, a very important character.
Oh my god!
But that's what this character didn't need to either one be there or two need to die. Like I think that's just a throwaway. That's a cop out to do shock value and stuff like that.
I want to get to that because I have a question about that too. But what do you think about just the idea of a story that sets out to kill a character, especially an established character?
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to narrow it down. I feel like there's nothing wrong if you go in. I think it might be even easier to make it feel organic to the story if you know going in who's going to die and, kind of like write the story that way, the themes, the characters' journeys to kind of make that the climax.
Yeah, because you can't argue with that. It's like inorganic to the death of Superman for Superman to die.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Yeah, so I feel like, if you have a writer or editor or whatever, the company's going in knowing who's going to die, they can write it to that point, which tends to help the story out a little. If it's more like Russian roulette, who's going to die, then a lot of the times it does feel random. It does feel unnecessary. It's like, okay, well, that could have been anybody.
Yeah, especially whenever they market in the way of like, oh, in this mutant of mutant stories, all these mutants die. It's like, well, why? Like, okay, cool. I'm excited now.
Well, they've done some stories that were almost all about just killing characters, too, which are in and of themselves like. So there was Ultimatum. Did you guys pay attention to that? It was you kind of had to care about the Ultimate Universe of Marvel. So they just did a story where they basically killed almost all the characters.
Yikes.
The one after the other. Yeah. And I almost was fine with it because it was like, oh, that's kind of what they're doing here. Yeah. So actually, same thing with Avengers Disassembled. As much as people didn't like that because some of the deaths in it, people have claimed like Hawkeye famously dies in it and kind of randomly.
Yeah.
But even that one I had to I can't completely criticize it because the whole point of the story is that they've we're going to completely destroy the Avengers.
Yeah, I feel like that brings up kind of continuity thing too, like whether these deaths are occurring in like specific one shots that aren't connected to the main continuity, or whether or not they're going to die in universe, like in the main storyline. Then it's like they're more likely to come back, especially if they're big names.
Exactly. I mean, and I think you kind of touched on something that if they do kill a character, it should mean something. I mean, it should be tragic. So if you kill a character that hasn't had a comic in 10, 20 years, nobody knows about, nobody cares about, or their team has been disbanded for years, I mean, what's the point of killing? Why bring him back on the page if you're just going to kill him?
So back to your thing about Panther, I think it's also worth thinking through is like sometimes it's clear the story they're just killing people to raise the stakes, or I love that trope of to kick the dog, so to show the villains are really really bad villain. But we're feeling like a little bit maybe that's cheap.
Yeah, I mean, you needed to show Superboy Prime's strength by punching somebody's head off. I think that's cheap because it's like we know how strong he is. He's been taking on all these people throughout the story. So yeah, punch your head off.
Well, I'm going to agree with you generally. I will say in that case, that scene was more to prove that he had gone over the line. Because in the story, he really is slowly he's kind of weird and bad now. That's the moment where he actually weirdly kicks the dog or punches the panther head, which is
that's the new metaphor for it now.
Where it's he's like a child. I actually thought it was cool. Not that he killed her. I kind of agree with you. It feels very random, but I thought it was cool that they showed that he becomes a villain at that point. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it also they picked, like you mentioned, two crappy characters. Nobody really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Red Star that he freeze breaths him, and he doesn't die, but he's just gone for a while after that.
If I remember, he kills Panther and Wildebeest.
Yeah. Yep. Baby wildebeest. by the
Baby.
way.
Well, yeah.
The character literally has a name Baby, and he killed him.
Yeah.
But I mean, and another good point is death in comics should be rare. I
Sure.
don't. I mean, if you have 50 deaths within a year of, let's just say, Marvel or DC or whatever storyline, is it really going to mean that much? As if you had maybe 2 in that entire year?
It loses its resonance. There's no quote about that. Like, just the mere notion of somebody dying in a comic that's gone forever. We're not. I don't think we're ever getting back the idea. Because I mean, yeah, when Gwen Stacy died, the idea of it happening.
She died?
And the way it
Well,
died.
she's fictional, so yeah.
Yeah, and you did bring up a good point about Ultimatum, because that book literally drips with blood.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote
You got a super cool edition.
characters die by cannibalism, decapitation, natural disasters, and anything else under the sun.
Yeah, everybody died in a grandiose way.
Yeah.
In that one.
That's kind of like a parody almost.
Oh yeah, I think so. And I think in a lot of ways Marvel was like, we're done with this now.
Yeah, it was shock value and characters from the Ultimate Universe. I mean, what? Okay, cool.
Well, so I think that what's interesting about it now, I am on the fence, but what's interesting about it is that like they've had like Deadpool and Punisher kill the Marvel universe,
I love
and
that.
a bunch of and a bunch of what ifs, and there are these dark fantasies that take place outside of continuity, and that's kind of the point, right? So I think they knew that the Ultimate Universe was coming to an end, and they were like, "Oh, so they're kind of real. They're not just hypothetical fake universes. It was a real universe, but we're in it. Let's end it in this equally dark, gross fantasy way."
Cool.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean,
See, I don't like the whole like torture porn. Like, I mean, how they die is really important. Ugh.
Yeah.
no, I think you're right that there is a good or bad. There's a pornographic aspect to it. That there's really
like when Superman punches through the Joker's chest in Injustice.
Oh yeah, DC's Ultimatum.
Yeah.
By the way.
Kind of.
Oh my! I looked it up. There's like 50 everybody.
I just pretend that doesn't happen.
You can go on YouTube and it shows you the order that everybody dies.
That, I mean, it was more impactful, that scene, because one, it's Superman doing it. 2, the Joker's dying by Superman, which Batman's in the background like, oh shit.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
what? But then you had Ultimatum, which, I mean, the Blob is eating Wasp. So it's like,
I
okay.
hate that panel.
Well, technically she drowned and he ate her corpse.
That's gross. It's
He
still
ate,
gross.
he ate her.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't seem too far fetched from the Blob doing than what Superman did. So that's why I'm just like, okay, this one doesn't make sense, and this one kind of makes sense as far as like if you're going for shock value. So like the shock value of Blob doing that, I'm just like, okay, I could see this gigantic blob of a man eating somebody, I guess. But Superman doing that, it's just, I don't know.
But I think I see your point. But I think either way, it's an excuse for them to take established characters that they could never kill in a regular context,
In main continuity.
and be like, oh, here's a universe where they can stab each other in the face.
Yeah, they're all zombies now. They're getting eaten.
Which
Yeah,
they
yeah.
did do, by the way. Marvel Zombies.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned it.
Which is so bad.
I feel like if death happens in the main continuity, there are 3 avenues that I'm like, all right, I accept this, and it's generally just pretty good.
Here we go.
Yeah, I know, right? I thought really hard about this. Be proud. Origin stories, right? Because a lot can come with grief and trauma and how they deal with it. Obviously, I mean, Batman's a famous, like it goes into the character's mentality and it shapes them from then on. So I feel like Uncle Ben dying and his last words to Peter really resonate, and that's kind of like where Peter goes with this character.
Right.
So origin stories.
Those characters are written to die.
Exactly.
They're created for that purpose.
Exactly. So like in an origin story, I'm like, okay, death, and you dealing with that death, with the grief, with the trauma, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And they stayed dead, by the way.
Yeah.
Ben and Martha and all of them, they all stayed
Oh,
dead.
just wait. You know they were marketing assholes. Just wait.
Well,
Like,
they
I'm
come back
saying-
in alternate universes
Yeah,
sometimes.
there's like alternate versions
No,
or
you're
like clones or
you're absolutely
projections, but they've never come back.
no,
the
I
main
agree.
continuity.
Yeah, in that continuity, which I'm like,
Well, and it's
that's
because
fine.
the heroes would be different or non-existent at
Right.
that point.
Yeah.
2 would be if they die and they come back, like if they die in their story and they come back as a more interesting version of themselves.
Sure.
So like Bucky Barnes dying as like that quirky sidekick of Captain America in the old days, and then coming back as the Winter Soldier. That's
It's an improvement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was just a progression of his story.
Yeah.
So he died in his story, and then it went down an interesting path. You could say the same thing about Jason.
Yeah.
And then 3 is if they do really something interesting with the void that's left behind of a major character disappearing for a while. Like Death of Superman, obviously, they had their own Battle of the Cowl when Batman's displaced through time in Final Crisis, and the Robins kind of have to fight over who becomes Batman. Those are interesting stories because they did something interesting with the void that was left behind of the character.
That's a good point.
Yeah, death can be like
they
this.
didn't just ignore the fact that a character died like comics or maybe media in general ought to do.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
dealt
that
with
is
it.
true. Death should have ramifications.
Yeah.
I mean, to your last point, I really think it should. I mean, even like subtle ways, like, I don't know, maybe like Bruce hiding in his room if one of the Robins dies, and you see that. There's a good time for that or
Yeah.
whatever. But I mean, if nothing happens, if they die and it just carries on and nobody shed a tear, it's like, okay, what was the point of them dying?
For one
then?
issue, you're like, that was so sad. That person was basically my son. I'm over it now. 2 issues later.
Yeah.
And also there's this idea where they'll telegraph the resurrection in the death. But I think Batman was a little bit like that. It was a great moment where he's killed by Darkseid.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we were pretty clear he's coming back, I think, too soon. But fair enough. I mean, we can argue about the details. Martian Manhunter, at his funeral, Superman's like, we'll all pray for a resurrection. He might as well have winked. It's like, and in that case, I gotta.
That's actually,
back up a
that
little bit.
reminded me. So Brett Metzler, the guy that wrote Identity Crisis,
Yeah.
in interviews and when people were talking to him, there's things that he said to where DC gave him a list of characters that was like, here, these are the ones that you can kill.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, what?
Yeah.
So the one he killed was probably on that list, which was Sue Dibney, which is like, wow, why is she on that list and why is there a list? Like,
So Identity Crisis is maybe the biggest, I don't know, dilemma for a lot of people who talk about death in comics, because at one point it is, you are killing a character and that character, you're like breaking that story machine. Okay, there's no more stories from that character, at least not while they're dead,
Yeah.
to tell a good story. But it's an amazingly written story.
oh yeah.
And we haven't talked about that criteria yet. It's the hidden thing, and it's true of all things in comics, but it has to be well written.
Yeah.
There's so many
It
deaths in
definitely
comics where I'm
has
like,
to
this is a
be.
bad story.
Yeah, it has to be executed well. I mean, there are definitely parts with Identity Crisis. I mean, because I feel like I might bring this up a few times. Identity Crisis is when the elongated man's wife gets murdered, and it goes from there.
Yeah.
Dr. Light is accused of killing her, and then you come to find out that he also raped her in the Watchtower.
Jesus
So
Christ.
much
So
stuff.
when that stuff happens, that story is really well written, and then that shit happens, and it's like, okay, like, she
Yeah.
was already dead. She was burned. Like, I mean, he's holding her burned corpse. It's like, that's enough shock value for that.
Yeah.
And then you had to continue writing and like, oh, by the way, she was also raped. It's like, well, why? That wasn't needed. Like,
Yeah, that's a good point.
and then they wipe his memory.
Well, I feel that there's something inherently icky about a woman dying to progress a man's story.
The
In
woman
general?
in the refrigerator.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah.
kind of like,
I mean, it's unfortunate because this is through sort of just general misogyny, but you get to a point where it's so overdone. Now it feels like it can't be done. And that's also a bad situation. It can't be the case that women are just immune to death in comics now, because if they are killed, they fall into this sort of thing. So we're still in a place now where it's like, if a female character is killed, we have to ask, like, is this a legitimate thing, or is this another example of them killing a lady girl? I think that's the appropriate way. No, but
You've said that before. I don't know why you keep saying lady
I think
girl.
Stephen Fry said it once, and it's been in my head for 15 years. I think is what happened.
There is a character. So I was like, death in comics should not be permanent, right? Or should be permanent, depending on the character. I mean, where do you guys?
I'm
feel
going
about
with nah.
like, so it shouldn't be a revolving door.
Well, so it shouldn't be a revolving door, not because characters shouldn't get resurrected, but because that metaphor is suggested immediately.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it happens sometimes,
It
like
does
literally within next issues.
But that's what I'm saying. That's the thing I don't like, is that like it shouldn't. I don't want to. 3 months is not enough. If
Yeah.
you're going to kill a character,
so take time to figure out how to bring them back.
I think it has to be, because
Known as the Barry Allen treatment.
Absolutely, and I want to talk about that too, because you love the Flash. So we should
I was
talk.
trying so hard not to talk about Flash this
I
episode.
know. Well, you failed, but I think at an empirical level, there's so many stories where characters die, and come back later, where both stories are so good, I just can't be the guy to say that if you die, you have to stay dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I mean,
agree.
I'm just like, I can't be like, yeah, you know what? Grow some balls, DC and Marvel, you know, indie comics. Make those characters stay dead. And then they kill Dick Grayson. And we'd be like, no. No. I didn't mean that character. So I feel like you run into the problem, these companies do, of killing off permanently a person that has a fan base. They don't want to isolate or alienate any of their fans. So
We've mentioned it before, but there's some of these characters are like the quote $1 million whale.
Yeah.
And they just have inherent value. It's just not realistic.
Clark
to
Kent
think
said
of.
forever, kid. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm a huge Thor fan. You're a huge Flash fan, and I would argue that both the death of those characters and the resurrection are some of their best moments. If I go back in Thor comics, his death that Michael Avon Oeming did and his resurrection to J. Michael Straczynski, they're fantastic stories. And I wouldn't want them not to exist to observe this rule. Is there a single person that doesn't like the Barry Allen death?
Yes.
Really?
so
I mean, just in terms of its writing.
as
and stuff.
as a Flash fan,
Yeah.
I love Barry.
Yeah.
I was upset when he died.
Yeah.
I fell in love with Wally
Yeah.
for years. Barry was gone.
All that
Yeah.
Wally.
Yeah,
And you never even met Wally. That's
So I mean, you had this thing where Wally was the Flash for a long time, and the fan base was okay. This is the Flash. There is no other Flash. Barry's gone. Whatever. And then you had Bart come in, and Wally was gone because after the events of one of the crises, Bart came back and was adultified into the Flash. And then people weren't receiving Bart too well, so they killed him off. The Rogues killed him, stomped on him to death.
Yikes.
Because they were afraid they would go to jail. I mean, that death is ridiculous, by the way. He gets his powers taken away and they stomp him to death. So, and then they killed him to bring back the other Flashes. So it's like, yes, I like that the other Flashes are back, but the writing to get there or just killing off this character that wasn't selling well or people weren't receiving well, I don't like.
Well, just Wally himself has had so many deaths just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, recently.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole new crisis is all about his death.
So I want to enter in this part. This is a great example to sort of do it, that the marketing department is a tremendous impetus behind this stuff. And, in comics, it becomes a problem. And I mean, the analogy I have in my head is that you don't let car salesmen design an engine for a reason. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think what becomes difficult is that you have these middlemen kind of people in editors where they have to be very concerned with sales, but they are involved in the creative team. And I think it makes things difficult. So a good example with Bart is, so you want to bring back the other Flashes. So why don't you just have Bart retire? Why don't you have him take on some other, because it doesn't sell issues. Not on its face.
Well, and they backed themselves in the corner with Bart coming from the 30th century as a kid to now, and they adultified him. So they're like, oh, well, we can't have 3 Flashes running around that all look the same. So they're like, well, we have to kill him to bring him back as a kid again.
No, but the thing is, the 3 of us, I think, and a monkey with a typewriter could come up with a way for Bart not to die and get those other characters back.
He came back in the next event. So, I mean...
But you put so-and-so dies on the cover. I mean, it's a crazy thing. When characters die in comics, it's like the only time they end up in the news. You know what I mean?
You do have to think, though, like, what sells? It's like sex, violence, and shock value.
And why can't they do that? Instead of Bart Allen's killed, why can't they be like, somebody fucked Bart Allen? I mean, I feel like that's...
Well, that's still within the shock value.
No,
sex,
I know.
Violence, and,
Well, at least they get to keep being alive. Okay.
I mean, okay. Yeah, I mean, that it's just what sells. We're naturally drawn to... Who died? Like, I mean, so it is weird. Like, it is part of their problem, the whole marketing between Death of Superman and everything, but... That's just how it happens. I don't know. I wish there was a better way, but yeah. I mean, there's some stories that flew under the radar, like Annihilation, which is a fantastic story, and you highly recommend it.
Yep.
But what was out at the same time, and what was more marketed? Yeah, what was more marketed because it had conflict and it had death.
Oh, there's way more death than Annihilation, but the characters are less popular. So
big characters, death.
Iron Man and Cap aren't friends anymore.
Yeah, so it does beg the question of, like, even though it's good writing, if it doesn't I guess, pertain to the top 7 characters of that company or that run. It's like, is it worth putting all that effort into it if you're not going to market it?
Yes, but also I understand they need to make money.
Yeah.
That's how they keep the doors open, the windows, the lights on.
Yeah, both are true and they have to be observed. So you can do things that are good artistically that'll hurt sales and prevent you from being a company. But let's face it, you can also do stuff that sells issues that's bad for your stories.
Yeah.
And will end up being a problem later on. So, yeah, I think maybe we should write all the comics now.
Yeah, give us the reins, guys.
When kind of going back to the whole, like, does it have to be permanent revolving door type thing? There's one character that I've talked about that I hate that keeps coming back, but is the only character, one of them, that makes sense.
So let's guess. So this is a character that... Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, you can guess. I don't...
No, fine, keep going.
The Phoenix.
Is it the Phoenix?
Only one that should come back. I mean, her name is literally the Phoenix. So it's inherently resurrected, come back again, whatever. But I mean, there's too many other characters that just obviously have the Phoenix power. I mean, I know.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's the Phoenix Force, and then there's Jean Grey.
Yeah.
But she usually has the Phoenix Force when she dies.
Yeah.
Or the Phoenix loves her. I don't know.
Well, that story's just overdone in general.
We've
We've talked about that before.
It is, but it's hard to be like that character shouldn't, or that Phoenix Force shouldn't come back when it's like, but it is the Phoenix. So it's like, okay, I guess. But they shouldn't write it as often as they do.
Agreed.
I agree. But you did bring up a good point about women dying in comics. I think one thing that writers...
Negatively, by the way.
Yes. No, wait, no. I was confused by what you said. I think they really should pay attention to the politics of what they're doing. And then that might sound weird, but I mean, there's a reason why women in refrigerators is a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why the cliche of like, oh, the black person usually dies in the movie is a thing.
Yeah.
I think they should inherently be aware of what they're writing. So I don't know. That's just something that I think that should be done.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think for one, there's a lot going on there, right? And anybody here could speak for like the idea that somebody's dying, and it's some evidence of, in this case, like a kind of misogynistic, bias or something like that. Mm-hmm. There's also the fact that you can see the wires there. In other words, like it's like, oh, you're just killing this woman to make the guy look better. Like you can see the convention of it, which is annoying. Mm-hmm. Like this doesn't feel like it's part of the story, like, or it needs to happen or something like that. Oh, speaking of which, I wanted to ask, I've heard this before, like, does the character need to die? And I want to know about that because I don't know that anything needs to happen in comics.
Of course not. But I mean, it depends on the story they're writing.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are things that should happen and need to happen in the story. But I mean, killing off Black Goliath and stuff like that. You have such a minor community of those characters in the comics and people that read those comics. It's like, was that really the best decision to do that? I mean,
well, yeah. And also, like I said, crossovers, we haven't talked about this yet. I almost think crossovers are the entire reason for this episode.
Yeah.
Meaning there's been death and resurrection in comics for a long time, but it wasn't until this problem of crossovers that we felt this like forced deaths happening. Mm-hmm. As in fact, I have a list of deaths in comics I did not like, and they're almost always the ones that are at the tail end or the beginning or whatever, that they need to punctuate a crossover, which seems tragic to me because the idea is like, well, the story's only going to be really good if some character dies. Like, I don't...
I think it's an inherent problem that comes with reading comics. I mean, because like we've said, there's tons of characters that don't exist anymore or haven't been around, and it's like a big event happens and they all come together. It's like, well, I guess somebody's bound to get hit by that bullet that's just randomly shot. Like,
yeah. I mean, so that's, that brings up a really interesting point of view in and of itself. Some people have criticized the fact that there are War Machine and Secret Wars 2 is a great example. He just kind of dies randomly, but that happens in life.
Yeah.
So how do we make sense of that? Where it's like there is a kind of artificiality in that, like death in stories always has like it's important and has a kind of precursor and it has a theme. Whereas like in reality, a lot of times people die and there's not really a good reason for it. It just sort of happens. So when you do a story, do you have new responsibilities to depict death in an almost like kind of unrealistic way? Like, what do you guys think?
I feel like it speaks to your first point. I feel like the writing tends to be better. I mean, obviously death happens randomly in real life, but these are stories that they're publishing, they're thinking about, they're selling to a general market. People are reading them and young kids are absorbing lessons and all of that. So, I mean, media it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not actually real life. So I feel like if you're going to kill a character and you're wanting to be a little poignant, it has to, I don't know, the themes, the trajectory of the story should lead there. It shouldn't just be like a big crossover event is happening, so we're going to randomly kill a person off page, because that happens in life sometimes. And then not deal with it or do anything like that. I feel like that's kind of where the worst deaths in comics occur, when it's just kind of thoughtless or when they feel like they have to.
Yeah, or the death count isn't high enough.
Yeah, and it doesn't really lend itself to the type of story or just the story in general that they're trying to tell.
That's a good point. I mean, not to bring up Identity Crisis again, but that was specifically to kill somebody, or somebody had to die for that story to happen.
Yeah.
But if you're writing a story and somebody's like, or you think like, oh, maybe I should kill somebody to like bring stakes into this or like have shock value.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you write the story how you want to write it? And if a death should happen or naturally happens with the story that you're writing, because there's just too many times where it does feel like a character just dies for whatever reason, and the next panel they're just on to the next mission, or forget about it.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to like show the sort of like paradox of doing that, because if the idea is like you kill characters to create stakes, but if those stakes if that event doesn't resonate, then you basically negate the stakes. If nobody seems to care, I thought the point you made, Kayla, was a really good one, which is that like, if it's not organic to the story itself, if it's not what the story's about, what happens is the character dies and then they move on to where the story was actually headed.
Yeah.
It's like, so you took a little, like a death break.
Yeah.
Because you needed like something to happen, like a little snack. And then you're like, okay, let's continue. Let's get back on the ship and let's go.
Yeah, it's like
okay.
It's the corpse cul-de-sac. Yeah. You had to do that. And then
someone died. Let's go back.
Yeah.
But that's a really good point, because I don't think death in comics it's not a shortcut to stakes. Like, you don't need deaths in comics to create stakes. I mean, you could literally have a loss of a relationship, somebody having a baby. Like, I mean, just
honestly,
everyday normal things, or, something that's inherent to that character.
And also, you can create the presence of death in its potential. It's like very clear people can die. And sometimes you have to, maybe one good way to do that is obviously to kill a character. It is a reminder, hey, anybody could die. I actually think in a weird way it was well handled in Siege, where the Sentry ripped Ares in half. That's one of the most gruesome deaths, but I think it did kind of remind the reader, oh, this is, if Ares can die, anybody can die. And there was a lot of precursor to it. So it wasn't like a very, so I kind of get that. But yeah, you don't have to kill somebody to create that.
Well, I can't remember which episode I mentioned this, but it's kind of lazy now because of how often death happens in comics, and they know that they can bring the characters back, that it doesn't really resonate the same.
Yeah, I mean, think this whole episode is because of Endgame. So think about how they've done this entire like 10 or 11 years of Marvel now, where it's like they're building
movies
up to this point. I mean, there's been deaths here and there throughout the movies, but
kind of.
There's been more deaths in the movies than comics, I'd have to say.
I don't know about that.
One that sticks.
Well, mostly I'm thinking villains.
I mean, villains die in the comics all the time, and we're fine with that.
Yeah.
We're fine with villains dying in comics.
Yeah. No, that's true.
But I mean, I think the way that this whole thing of leading up to death and all of that, and literally having Lady Death right before the climax of this entire series, or the conclusion, I think that was a really good thing for them to do, because it wasn't kind of littered throughout the whole thing, or like these characters weren't dying throughout the whole thing like comics do. Yeah. Because a lot of the comics, the main characters are dying here and there. But I think that was a good thing that they did, that at the end, all these characters die. Are they coming back? We don't know. But that's the end game. That's the end story.
Yeah.
Well, so you brought up marketing, and it made me think of like, okay, we kind of knew Spider-Man was coming back. We don't know how or when or what's going to happen. Yeah. And then they fucking dropped the trailer for his movie before Endgame comes out.
Yeah.
And his movie is coming out next year.
That's fine.
I'm just, is it though?
Again, I feel like I kind of mentioned, I talked about it a little bit earlier. It's more like, that these characters that died in the snap at least are coming back. So your main source of grief isn't really this character. I'm never going to see them again. I really love Peter Parker. It's like, oh my God, look how destroyed Tony Tony Stark is cradling his ashes.
But
or
yeah.
like, oh my God, Steve just saw Bucky, who he just got back, disintegrate in front of his face. You know,
that's a
like
good point.
But I think it kind of lowered the stakes for general audiences. So people that don't necessarily read
I
comics.
can't speak to general audiences.
No,
I
but-
feel things really intensely.
People are fools.
So I was talking to my little brother about it, and he saw the Spider-Man thing. He's like, "Oh, okay, I guess he's not dead."
Yeah.
So it's like leading up to Endgame and like them finally coming back. At least with Spider-Man, is kind of spoiled for him, I guess, or like he's like, "Oh, I guess he's coming back." I'm like, "Yeah, that happens." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Never mind." Like, I'm not gonna get into this death in comics thing with you.
Well, Endgame is also weird only because Infinity War was just a part one.
yeah.
And it was really kind of marketed that way and created that way. So people going into it with the snap were like, oh, there's another movie.
Yeah.
So there's a feeling where it's like that. I think if there wasn't another movie yet,
Yeah.
if they
You had no idea going in.
Exactly. I think that would have been way like, what the hell? If we weren't sure what the status is, but the status is like they're gonna,
They're going to come.
yeah. Yeah.
Back.
I just thought it was weird that like they didn't need to release the trailer like over a year ahead of time.
I agree. I mean, that's a point unto itself, which is like, am I supposed to write this in the calendar? Was it like,
Yeah, because it's
3 years from now, get ready.
They could have released it with this movie. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Because you
Yeah.
brought up marketing, and I was like, that was a weird marketing thing they did because, I mean, we don't know when some of these characters are coming back.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, who knows when a Doctor fucking Strange 2 is going to be coming out, but, I'm not complaining about that.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another question, and I think it's near and dear to all of our hearts because we have characters that we have an almost
I'm scared.
preternaturally unhealthy fixation on. Let's say that's
Where
the
are you
nicest way.
poking?
So here, who can you kill? And the reason I say that is that everybody has an opinion about like, oh, it's okay to kill characters here and there and everything like that. You alluded to this earlier, Kayla, when it's like, okay, but they're going to kill Nightwing. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that won't need. That's obviously bad writing. If you do
I
that,
hate it.
I will throw knives at you. That has to happen.
I think she did bring up a good point, though, within that same conversation,
Yeah.
is that if you kill a character, or the reason why you kill a character is because they're bad or going crazy or whatever, they just weren't progressing,
Yeah.
bring them back better
Yeah.
or bring them back fixed or something or into something else. So your point with Jason Todd is a great example. They turned him into a different character, which needed to happen because there was already, I don't know, like 3 Robins at that time or whatever.
Yeah.
But so I think that's a good point for that.
But you don't, and I completely agree, that's a good point. But when they kill your character, you don't know they're coming back all the
No.
time.
Yeah.
If
Or
you're-
when,
Exactly.
really.
Especially if they're not the top 10 characters. So if
Of
Superman dies, Superman's coming back.
Yeah.
And even I will say at the time that I think the death of Superman might be the first occasion of a really major character dying.
Excuse you.
What's that?
Cool.
Oh, the Flash. Yeah, sorry, no offense.
Crisis on Infinite Earths came
Yeah,
out
I was
in.
like,
Well, no, but this is more to the point. When characters died, then they just stayed dead.
for
yeah,
a
Flash
long
was
time.
gone for
Yeah.
a long time.
So Superman dies, and there was and if you were aware that Flash had died and Supergirl had died, there was every reason to think Superman might be gone for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And even now, so now we're a little bit more sophisticated, and when a character dies, we're like, okay, they're gonna die, they're coming back, and like, but it could be the difference between next year or 8 years,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you just won't get to
Well,
read
and
them.
that I think that's back then, or like when Batman died and Superman died. They kind of both have parallels to their story because they both have fighting for their cowl or their cape or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing for them to do because it shows the ramifications and shows the story progressing after they die. Yeah, obviously they're going to come back. I
Yes.
mean, they have to, but I think it's the journey to that makes it better instead of them just kind of killing these characters off and then them coming back randomly at, whatever fucking moment they feel like it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But I do think we should put on the table this idea that like sometimes the criticism that is on the internet about dying, about, oh, they're killing a character, I think some of it's grounded in you don't want this character to die because you just are a fan of theirs.
Yeah, I mean,
But that
it's the
not-
difference between like you're watching something and something takes place that's completely in character, but
Yes.
you don't like it.
Exactly.
It's the difference between that's bad writing and also
Yeah.
like I didn't like that, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's bad writing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I mean, I agree with her. I think that's I guess that's the point that I was trying to get to. If they kill him, I'd be super upset. But if they make it make sense afterwards,
Yeah.
then I'm like, okay, I'll forgive you. I'll keep like loving this
I'll
character.
be waiting, but I'll read you in the meantime.
So I'm just curious because we've gotten a few things on the table here. We've talked a lot about like how to badly kill a character, poorly ways to do it. One, I think bringing them back in a cheap way feels like they
Or
were
out of nowhere. They're just like, hey guys, it's like, what the fuck? Where were you?
And actually, just to touch on it, apparently Jean Grey, I wasn't reading comics at the time, I don't think it was alive, but when Jean Grey came back the first time, she did just kind of appear.
No, she
in
literally
Fantastic Four.
They do it a lot with
literally showed up.
continuity changes too. Like characters that were dead at the end of New 52, on Rebirth they're alive. They were always
that's a
alive
good point.
the whole time.
Yeah, Hawkeye came back after House of M because there was like a reality shifting, so they're like, oh, here's a good opportunity to
He's back.
bring this
Woof.
guy. Yeah.
Right. I mean, but I'm more lenient on that kind of thing. Whenever like reality changes and like, which I'm assuming is going to happen in Endgame or something's going to get reversed or something.
Yeah.
Then it's like,
Definitely
okay,
is
that
alluding
makes
to
sense.
time travel for sure.
Yeah.
As long as Loki comes back, I'll be fine.
He's one of the up in the air ones.
I know.
Well, the I think people would just be like, oh, he's straight up dead, but the show is coming out.
Yeah.
I know.
So it's like it could
Fucking
just
marketing
be,
again.
but it could just be prequels.
It could be.
And
he's
actually,
a god. He's been
I
around
would-
for a
there's
long
that
Yeah.
time.
too.
Yeah.
Take place any of the 5,000 years he's been alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want any of my favorites to die.
Well, okay, so we've talked about execution. Are there any do's and don'ts to like who to kill?
I mean, I think we've kind of been talking about it like throughout this whole thing. I think it has to make sense if the story calls for it and there's actual ramifications. I don't know. Right?
I feel like periphery characters in a main story, maybe. Not like a character that's not popular. How do I explain this? It's like they only exist within that one story. Like the character in Superman comic that only exists in Superman's universe. He's a minor employee that works for the Daily Planet.
It's the ensign from Star Trek. Where it's
Yeah.
like
The red shirts.
Yeah. And Ensign Reynolds come. It's like I don't know Reynolds. This guy's not long for this world.
I guess. Fine, guys.
Here's to support you for a second. Let's not kill any more Flashes. I'm seriously kind of done with it.
Why are the speedsters always the ones? To
I
die?
don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
they-
a lot of times they don't technically die. A lot of times they get trapped in the Speed Force, which is technically them dying because they're
That's
off
the soul world
comic.
of the DC.
Yeah, I mean, they're off comic for years and years. Like when Wally, during that Bart time I was talking about, Wally and his wife and kids just went into the Speed Force and disappeared.
I think part of it's just like, look, I'm kind of done with this story, and I don't want more. Like, I get there's almost a weird perverted nostalgia with killing a character that's been dead a lot.
Yeah.
If you look at what people are saying about Heroes in Crisis, I'm trying to hold my tongue with Heroes in Crisis because I like the writer for what he's done. A lot of people.
So let's see where it goes. That's a big.
That's what I'm saying. There's 2 issues left, so let's see where it's going.
Yeah.
But to be fair, Wally just came back.
Yeah.
In Rebirth, he's an integral part to Rebirth coming back. He was stuck. He's the one that remembers all the stuff. All the characters don't. He just came back, and then they kill him.
I agree.
And that's the catalyst for the story. It's like, you couldn't have killed... You had Lagoon Boy in this damn comic. Like, you couldn't have killed
We
that
all
one.
want him to die.
Well, they could stop killing Robins. I'd be cool with that.
I think that's another one.
Yeah,
a handful.
DC
All of them
has-
have died at least once in the last 5 years.
Yeah, DC has some weird, like, fetish thing with, like, it's if it wears red... and it works at night, they have to die like repeatedly.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I'm trying to think. Oh, here's another one. Professor X can stop. Goddamn
Yeah,
dying.
for real.
I mean, but I'm not
You
saying that.
shush.
I'm not saying that out of this great affection for the character.
I
mean, I
am.
do love. I know that, Yeah. But I just mean from a writerly standpoint. I don't love that they'll kill characters when they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
That's not my favorite. Where it feels like, okay, you didn't know somebody else died like that recently. Where Cyclops. Cyclops died, and I was like,
forgot.
well, you guys turned him into a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I mean, which is fine.
I think people were calling him like the new Magneto too.
Which I loved. Look, here's the thing. You can redeem the character, you can keep them a villain, or you can kill them. It doesn't have to be. I would have loved to see...
Well, like a la Hal Jordan, who did all of those things.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a good
Hal Jordan became Parallax.
Yeah.
And he was obsessed with fixing things.
Yeah.
Sun was going out and he was like, well, I guess this is my chance. And he restarted the sun. That was a really good trajectory for him to redeem himself and also kill the character at the same time.
Absolutely. But the thing is that we don't see that a lot, and I want to see it more. Like, I think, how cool would Cyclops's crawl, and it would be a crawl back to, what's that? Yeah. would be like him becoming a good guy, getting over everything he did. But here's what's going to happen. They killed him, and they're going to bring him back like nothing happened.
And he's
so
good
it's like
again.
nothing to learn.
No guilt.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So, I mean, I think both of those would be fine.
Yeah.
If they took their time and didn't just do it as like, oh, we made him bad only to like bring him back good. Like we just wanted to like dabble in the little evil sandbox for a minute to, you know, bring you over to the, you know, the kitty thing again. Like
he was in that sandbox for a while.
Yeah, he was, but I think, but with him dying, if they bring him back and he's good, just all of a sudden, and like there's no really ramifications for that, then I mean, what was the point?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
What was the point of all those years of him being the new Magneto if he's just gonna? It's all fine now. I'm
say
done.
whatever you want about Thor recently, because a lot of guys, it's only guys, were mad about what happened, but they took a long time to have him in the gutter, doubting himself, and they're doing, well, you're just a bad person, but they're no, I'm just playing, but they are spending a lot of slow time bringing him back up and building up his confidence.
It's
a
over
great way
5
to do
years that they've been doing it.
Absolutely.
Love it. That's how it should be.
Yeah, the story has, I mean, personally for me, like I've said this before, and I know I've talked to Jared about this, I didn't give two shits about Thor before the whole Jane
you can't
Thor
help
thing.
but say it every time it comes up.
Yes.
I did not like this character.
But I think it goes with good
I'm going to start
writing.
doing that with Flash, by the way. Like, I've never thought he was fast. I think he's probably...
Oh, gosh.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Them fighting words.
You wouldn't even be able to bring up any flash facts, by the way.
Totally. He's Gemini.
There we go. Actually, he's an Aries. But
Is
that's
he
fine.
really?
No, I don't know.
He doesn't seem anything like an Aries, let's be real.
Pisces, maybe? I don't know. Tell us, people. I don't know
Yeah.
what fucking sign the Flash is.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's good writing, and I think the character necessarily wasn't dead. Him being Thor was. He was still around, but I thought it was a good way to explore this other side of the mythos of that character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like it. All right, we're going to take a short little break so you guys can hear from our friends Sean and Abby over at He Said, She Said podcast.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Abby.
Why so glum?
I can't find a podcast. I guess I could listen to another podcast about eating for your blood type, but I'm looking for something fresh.
What about a podcast about emo music?
Yeah?
Super Bowl halftime shows?
I'm listening.
The intimacy-building nature of pinworms?
Hell yeah!
Well, I think I have the thing just for you. It's called the He Said, She Said podcast.
Oh, I know that podcast. We're the hosts.
Produced by yours truly and endorsed by yours truly. Listen in if you're looking for ill-informed opinions on cultural topics. We don't take ourselves too seriously.
Clearly.
All right. So to kind of wrap it up about death, I like knowing people. I know, right? Oh no,
The end of
we have to
death.
stop talking about sad things that are going to happen or have already happened. I like knowing what people's faves and least faves are. Just so we can start off with favorite death. I guess not like yay, I'm glad that character's gone, but more of a that was pulled off really well and it made sense for the story.
Okay, when you said that, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll tell you about my favorite mutilation. I don't know.
Yeah, that's favorite death doesn't sound as bad as like favorite injury. Which one?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Least favorite death is Black Widow in Secret Empire. When Cap came back as a Hydra agent, or not came back, was a Hydra agent, and he literally just like stabbed her in the neck with his shield, broke her neck.
Yeah, broke her neck.
Jesus.
And that's it. And then they just carried along with the story.
And he's already a Nazi, right?
Yeah.
So it's like
That's already super
like we already knew
offensive.
he was evil. I think that was
Why? What was the fucking point of that? And she literally didn't have anything with furthering the plot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just kind of was like, oh, hey, Cap. Okay,
Yeah.
let's keep going. It's like, what?
Yikes.
That's my least favorite one. Only because, like, I don't know. I just didn't like how they executed that. She had nothing to do with the story, and she's a big character. I mean, whatever. Okay, and then favorite death. It would have to be Laurie Grimes from Walking Dead. That sounds weird because how she died carrying Judith and getting shot.
That's awful.
But I think for the character and Rick having that character development, having that struggle, so it dealt with death in a really good way in a universe filled with death, because it showed how far that character is willing to go before breaking.
Did not see it coming, by the way.
Oh no, and that was a very surprising one, because there was a baby involved,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, this comic was already like really gruesome, and it just went downhill from there. But I think for a character's development, and it wasn't just like a one and done thing. It had ramifications, I believe, still now. I mean, he's still dealing with all this stuff.
Rick went crazy.
Rick's my fave, and I feel like they explored it really well with him in
And
comics
Carl.
and on the show.
It's Coral.
I don't know. It kind of towed the line of a little bit of misogynistic.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, there is definitely like misogynistic.
Especially because
things.
Lori was, pardon my French, a bitch. You know, like she's not a very likable character. I don't like her personally. I don't like her at all.
But I
feel like the way she died.
I didn't
was
like her
little
either.
eh.
And I think that might have been the point of killing her, to get him away from that, like to kind of leave that part behind for him to further. That sounds really weird.
No, I
but,
mean,
like,
I
the baby shouldn't have
I
died.
agree.
That's all.
Like, no, I totally agree. Noah hates women. Okay, let's. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so those are mine. Go ahead, Jared.
So worst one is relatively recent, and maybe it makes sense because
on your mind.
and also in this respect, I think they are getting worse. When the Hulk was killed in Civil War II, it's just, I mean, there's a lot of bad deaths in that one, but the story is sort of just that when they get this prognosticating power, which is what the story revolves around, which is whether they should use it, they find out that Banner has been trying to re-Hulk himself in a way. He was
Compromised.
depowered, but now he's going to try to re-Hulk himself or something like that. And he made some deal with Hawkeye. Go back to read the details, are a bit convoluted, I think, but like
He's pretty much said that if he ever loses his shit, for him to kill him.
But what's not confusing to me about it is why is he starting to be the Hulk again? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is that it has very little to do with the story, and what's worse, it sort of has all these bad things. It felt forced. It felt like they were just trying to kill some character they didn't know what to do with, and he comes back almost immediately.
Yep.
So, I mean, a lot of people, I think, who didn't read that probably didn't even know that the Hulk was dead for yeah, exactly. He was.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't forget that he died, but it was such a like, okay, he died, and then move on with the story thing.
Yeah.
And then when Immortal Hulk came out, I was like, what? Oh, that's right. He died.
You should be dead longer than the time between Game of Thrones seasons. That should be some sort of rule. And then my favorite is the original death of Jean Grey.
No,
And not because I want her to die. I thought she was a
just say that she just
fantastic
popped up,
character.
though?
What's that?
Didn't you just
Yeah,
I didn't
but
like
we're-
her resurrection.
Oh, okay.
but
That's a good point.
But
Okay.
my
Yeah,
feeling
yeah.
is that like that if it's soon, but it took a while, and I think you can actually write a good death and a bad resurrection, and vice versa.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
oftentimes, let's not forget, it's different writers a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in this case, the Dark Phoenix saga, it helps that it's one of the greatest comic book stories that's ever been written, but also it feels very earned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one, it's Phoenix. Death and birth are in the name.
Yeah.
It's not arbitrarily chosen. And it's what an amazing moment, which is that this character has been sort of undone by this cosmic force that's been manipulated by the Hellfire Club.
So ignore everything that happens afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the
recycling
rehashing
of the
that.
story.
Yeah.
If you
Great
just take the
story.
original content.
Yeah. She has a moment where she realizes that she's completely out of control and sacrifices herself for all of her friends and everything like that. I think it's an amazing scene, and it happens well before we're all tired of like, like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
Stop
and I think
dying!
that's a good point that you brought up, because that story has stakes with, this character becoming evil and they're just going to destroy the world or whatever. But I think that the character realizes her own stakes. And I think that's a really good. I like that you pointed that out. Just saying, internal struggles. I love those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, worst for right now, I'm guessing it would change on a different day, right? But I just did all that research for Stephanie Brown. I was just reading again about her death, and yeah, I'm going to choose Stephanie Brown for worst death, because not only did it feel like, I used the term earlier, like torture porny, but she died in a really gruesome way, felt a little sexist, especially just the way the editors too were handling it when they were interviewed. It just basically the whole controversy around that death made it worse.
Yeah.
Outside of the death in the comic itself, everyone's handling of it, like the execs at DC, I was just like, this is a mess.
Yeah.
Disappointing.
Yeah,
and then
you
they
guys.
just brought her back.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, she wasn't really dead. It's like, oh, okay, I forgot that's how it works.
Did not like.
Well, the thing, I mean, it felt like they created her almost to kill her, for
Yeah,
one.
she
which
wasn't- yeah.
I don't love.
Girl Robin, and for less than a year, she's dead now.
Yeah, yeah. But in a weird way, not to say it's good, but there is a sense where if it wasn't for that tremendous backlash, she may have not had the life she has now, and I think she's actually really well accepted, part of the canon.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's kind of to your point. Bad death, good resurrection.
Good resurrection,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Opposite of Jean Grey.
Yes. Yeah. That worked out nicely.
For best, because Jared stoked this in my brain, I feel like in Watchmen, Rorschach's death at the end.
I love it.
I mean, like, it's so upsetting. It's so tragic, but it's like the clash of ideologies that just, like, it was building. It got so intense that I felt like this was pulled. I mean, it's just...
It feels just right that he would do that.
Like, and I'm okay with that. Only because of the leading up to it, you know that character, the end monologues that they have.
If something surrounding death and people start going out of character and stuff, I'm like, this is...
And he leaves a legacy.
It kind of parallel what your least favorite one. It's like, in a weird way, her death, Stephanie Brown's death, didn't seem in character for her.
Yeah.
Like, it just seemed, which is a weird thing to say, like, oh, that person's death isn't in character for them. But it's like the way she went out, and it was just
It
like
had
she
nothing to
gave
do
up.
with her character.
Yeah,
too.
it was like, why would... Yeah, so anyway, but yeah,
He died
death.
because of who he was, you know?
There's also, if I can just point, I think this is kind of neat. There was a structural necessity too that it fulfills, because like the plot of Watchmen is amazing, all the plotting. And so, what's the climax?
Still don't understand it.
Well, the climax already happened, right? Because with what's his name, with Ozymandias, we realize, oh, he didn't just do it; he did it earlier. So it's a big thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice.
Shivers.
So in a way, that Rorschach's explosive death is the kind of like a period.
Yeah.
To the end of the story
Yeah.
that we didn't get from, because of the weird
It's a
structure.
big old period on the ground.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's gross. Yeah, and I do like, just to kind of parallel the comic and the movie, I love that they did that really well in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, it just that whole scene, that's the one scene I always think about in that movie and in the comic. It's just, I agree. Period. And that's what we'll end it with.
So
Period on death.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the Fantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.